What's up guys, in today's tutorial we're back in the horror tutorial series and we are going to be going ahead and creating a death screen GUI. I'm super excited for this tutorial because it's going to be a little similar to Doors Guiding Light, you could say. We're going to have a little death message that pops up and then we're going to prompt the player to play again, because the more plays you get, the more money you get technically, so that's good for you as a developer. And before I keep on yapping on and on about what we're going to do, let's just get started. So let's go over to Starter GUI, which if you don't know, Starter GUI is simply a place where we put all of our GUIs we want to make, and then when the player joins the game, it's going to simply take all the GUIs that we made and then pass them right on to the player, and it's going to replicate that for every player that joins the game. So that way we can have just like one or two of these GUIs inside of here, and then every player that joins the game, it's pretty much just going to copy it and paste it into the player's GUI, and that's pretty much how that works. Now inside of Starter GUI right here, let's click on the plus icon and insert another screen GUI right here. And this screen GUI, let's just rename it to Death GUI. GUI stands for Graphical User Interface. A lot of people pronounce it as GUI as well, but I personally think that's a little weird. So I'm going to call it GUI, but you can pronounce it however you would like to. Now down here inside of the properties, let's turn on Ignore GUI Inset, which is going to make it so that basically whenever you press play inside of a Roblox game, you'll notice that you'll have these custom icons by Roblox already inside of your game. This is the leaderboard up here. This is the little chat box. This is all these other things right here. This is the Roblox menu. It's all of these little icons right here. Now, when you put a little GUI right here, let's say we had a frame up here in the top left corner and we did not have Ignore GUI Inset on. If we were to click on play, you'll notice that these little icons are going to push our frame downwards and it's not going to actually work all too well. However, if we stop the game and go into our Death GUI and turn on Ignore GUI Inset, then when we go ahead and play the game, you'll notice that our frame stays right where we want it to be. So when we ignore the GUI Inset, which is pretty much all these menu items pushing whatever we want downwards, then we can actually just have the frame right where we want it, and that is perfect. Now you also want to turn off Reset on Spawn, which is basically going to reset the GUI whenever the player respawns, which we don't want to do because we're having this enable whenever the player dies pretty much. And that's all we need to do for the Death GUI. Now I just added a frame in there to test, but let's click on the plus icon and we're going to insert a frame right here. If you don't know how to, you can press the plus icon and just search for a frame. This frame, it really doesn't matter whatever we name it, but we want to set the anchor point to 0.5, 0.5, and you'll notice this will offset it a little bit up in the top left corner. However, we can go down to the position and do a bit of a counter offset and say 0.5, 0, 0.5, 0, and this is going to position our frame right in the middle of our screen. Now you'll also notice a size property down here, so let's change the size up to 1, 0, 1, 0, and this is going to take up the entire size of our screen just like this. Now there's a difference between the scale and the offset properties for things like size and position. You'll notice that when we say 1, 0, 1, 0, there's actually two different sizes. There's the size scale, or the scale size, and there's the offset size. So the offset size is going to be the second set of zeros, or the second number after the first number in both of these little brackets right here. And the scale is going to be the first number. So the scale is 1 and the offset is 0. The difference is that the scale uses a percentage of your screen. So when we set it to 1, it's going to be 100% of our screen. However, if we change this down to like 0.6 and let's say 0.6 as well on the other side, you'll notice it'll be roughly 60% of our screen instead. However, if I were to change this to 0, 60, 0, 60, you'll notice this is much smaller because instead of being at 60%, it's actually going to be 60 pixels instead. And what's unusual about using 60 pixels instead of 60% is that it's not going to be all too great when you go to test out on different devices. Let's go to test over here and click on device. You'll notice that it's going to be a little bit larger on something like a phone or a tablet because 60 pixels is going to be much bigger on a smaller device compared to a much larger device such as a computer. So you just want to keep that in mind when you're making your GUI. I'm personally going to leave mine at 1, 0, 1, 0, so this will be 100% on every single device. That's another thing, is that if I had this on like 0, 10,000, 0, 10,000, And then went over to a device. You'll notice it's going to take up the entire screen, but there are some devices where this would just barely reach the end. Some would be a little bit smaller, and there are just all sorts of different monitors and devices that you have to take into account. So it's just better to use a percentage instead of a certain set of pixels, if that makes sense. Anyways, I'm going to change the background color down to a bit of a darker gray, even a little bit of black, I would say. Something like this. You don't want it to be entirely black because, in my opinion, it doesn't look all too great. I like mine to be a little bit lighter like this. And I believe that's everything that we need to do for our frame. Now inside of this frame, let's click on the plus icon right here, and we're just going to insert a text label. This text label, let's set the anchor point to 0.5, 0.5. You'll notice it'll do that same little offset as before. However, we can change the background transparency to 1, and then change the position to that same counter offset by saying 0.5, 0, 0.5, 0. The size we're going to set to, let's see, 0.4, 0, 0.2, 0. This will just make it a little bit bigger going this way. I may actually go down to 0.1 instead. And I'm also going to change the size on the x-axis, which is this left number right here, to 0.5 instead. And this should be pretty good for our text. Now, going down here into our text properties, let's click on text scaled so we can see it better. I'm also going to change the text color to a white color so that we can read it easier on the darker background. I'm going to change the font face to, you can do any font you want to. Since it is a horror game, you can do something like Eater. That's not Eater, that's Eater. You can also do something like Amatic SC. Something like this works. I'm pretty sure Doors just used a pretty common font like Roboto or something, or Ubuntu. I'm probably just going to be doing this one in all honesty. However, you can do whatever you would like to. I'm also just going to leave the text blank for now because we don't actually need it for the moment. Now, we have the text and we have the frame. The next thing we need is a button so we can go ahead and prompt the player to play again. So inside of our frame, let's click on the plus icon and let's insert a text button. This text button, pretty much the same properties as before. We're going to change the anchor point to 0.5, 0.5. We're going to change the position to 0.5, 0, 0.5, 0. And then we're going to change the size to roughly 0.3, 0, 0.1 maybe, 0. I'm going to change it to 0.2 and 0.2 as well. I may actually go down to 0.15 on the y-axis. Something like this looks good in my opinion. From there, I'm just going to change the text down to nothing because I don't want to have the text on the text button, and I will show you why. Let's just say we had some sample text right here, just literally sample text. You'll notice that whenever I hover over the button, there's a little bit of an overlay that goes over the button, and it's going to cover our text as well. And that just doesn't look as good to me. So what I like to do is instead you set the text down to nothing, and then you can duplicate this text label that we have over here and put it inside the text button, and then you can simply change the size to 1, 0, 1, 0, or in my case I may actually do 0.9 instead, so that way it's not all the way on the edges. And you'll notice that if we put some sample text in here this time, the text is white, so it's going to be very difficult to see on the background. So let's go ahead and change the background of our button here. I'm just going to make this a green color, like so. Now instead of having this say sample text, I'm going to have this say play again, and I'm also going to change the font from Ubuntu to Fredoka 1 simply because I love that font. I'm also going to change the size down to from 0.9 on the y-axis to roughly 0.6 instead, so that way the play again is right next to each other. And inside of our text button, this is simply a matter of preference, but I'm going to insert a UI corner, which you'll see will add a bit of a bevel to our frame right here. I'm just going to set this to 0.1, 0. And then inside the text button, I'm also going to add a UI stroke, which this UI stroke will simply add a black outline around our button, which in my opinion, it makes it look so much better. You can also throw that same UI stroke onto the text if you would like to, which also once again makes it look immaculate. We have our text button right here, and we have our text from before as well. I'm going to change this from Ubuntu to Fredoka 1 real quick, simply because I like that font as I was saying earlier. And we can change this text label over to our death message. because it's going to be our death message that we're going to be scripting later on. This text button, let's just rename to play again, and it really does not matter what we name the text label inside of that. And yeah, and then from there we can set this play again button visible to false, just like that inside of the properties. And that is perfect. So we have our death GUI, our frame, our death message, everything like that. So inside of our death GUI screen GUI, let's turn off enabled. Now the objective GUI, we want to turn off reset on spawn simply because we want to turn off the objective whenever the player dies, so that way it doesn't interfere with our death GUI. From there, let's go over to server script service right here. Let's click on the plus icon and we're going to insert a script. This script is going to be for when the player gets added to the game, so we can rename it to player added. Let's just start off here at the top getting a services comment, which is completely optional, but I like to write these comments to simply keep the code nice and organized. In my opinion, makes it much easier to read. I'm going to say local players will be equal to game get service players. The player service, which if you don't know is this player's service right up here, it holds all the players inside of your game. This is me right here, and you should be there as well on your own computer. If you're not, you simply have to play the game, and once you do that, it should add you to the player's service. However, let's go down here and we're going to create another comment for our functions. And inside of here, we're just going to say players.player added. We're going to connect a function. Now, player added is an event that whenever a player joins the player's service right here, as you see, my player joined a while ago, then we're going to pretty much signal an event. We're going to connect it to this event. And what it's going to do is going to take the parameter of player, and this is the player that actually joined the game. Now, any code that we write inside of this function, or between this parenthesis and between this E right here, is going to run whenever that player joins the player's service. If you want to have lives for your horror game, let's go ahead and say local lives will be equal to instance.new integer value. An integer is simply a number that doesn't have a decimal point. So first off, you should know that there are two different types of number values. There's a number value and there's an integer value. So an integer value is something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. However, it can't be 0.1, 0.2. However, a number value is something that can go into the decimal point. So yes, it can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It can also be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, etc. So I'm personally using an int value simply because we don't need decimal points for lives. However, you can do a number value if you would like to. We're also going to say lives.name will be equal to capital L lives, and then lives.value. This is where you're going to determine how many lives you want the player to have. So for me, I'm going to set this equal to 1 for testing, but you can do this to 3, to 5, to 10 even, however many lives you want the player to have before the death screen GUI is going to go ahead and appear. Let's say lives.parent will be equal to player now, and that is all we need to do for our lives value. So let's go down here. We're going to say local death will be equal to instance.new, and this is going to be a string value. Now, death.name is going to be equal to death with a capital D, and then death.parent is going to be equal to player. What this death string value is going to tell us what the player died to. We're going to be setting it inside of our horror monster, so whenever it kills the player, it will set the death value inside of that player to the horror monster. That way later on, when we go ahead and script our death message, it's going to check whatever killed our player, and then it's going to write its text message based off of that. So it's very important that we have this. From then on, we're going to say player.character added this time. Now you'll notice that whenever a player joins the game, there are actually two different things that the player has. There's the player and then there's the player's character. If I were to play the game right now and ignore any errors that appear in the output for the moment, and open up the player service, you'll notice that my player right here is Rusty Sillyband. And this is the player. So it holds like the backpack, which has my tool in it. It holds the player GUI right here, which has all my GUIs inside of it. And it holds all of the player scripts that we have. I'm going to move away from this guy because he's kind of bullying me here at the moment. Maybe onto this rock will be safe. But, oh, nope, it's not safe. So anyways, inside of the workspace, you'll notice I have my character that I'm able to move around with. This is my Rusty Sillyband character, or my avatar. So the character goes inside of workspace and it holds all the different things that make up your avatar, such as the body parts, the hats, the colors, the humanoid, which determines things like the walk speed and the health. So the character is pretty much the visual representation of the player in the 3D environment, and then the player is, I guess, the back end of the player. It's pretty much everything that you don't see on the player. You can think of it sort of like the physical and the mental aspects of a person. So whenever the player's character gets added, which is their avatar, and if you didn't know, the avatar gets added slightly after the player does, we're going to go ahead and connect a function with character as the parameter. So now we're going to check if lives.value is less than or equal to 0. Then what this is going to do is just going to check if the player's lives are once again less than or equal to 0, which means they've lost their lives. Then we're going to say character colon pivot to. Now I need to have a place to teleport them to, so that way this guy doesn't keep on bullying them while they're inside of their death GUI. So for me personally, I have this jump scare box over here that we made a few episodes ago. So I'm just going to be teleporting the player over here to this part, which I have named top part. If you don't have this named top part, that's fine. You can just rename this over to top part because we want it to be different from all the other parts so that we can teleport the player specifically to it. And we're going to say character pivot to, this is going to be game.workspace.jumpscarebox.box.toppart.cframe. Now, if you have anywhere else you'd like to teleport the player, maybe a specific part that's anywhere that will just keep them safe pretty much, you can just teleport them to there. You just simply provide the C-frame of the part that you want to teleport them to, and that will be perfectly fine. I guess you could also just say game.workspace.horrormonster.parent will be equal to something like game.replicate_storage, but I'll be honest, I didn't really think about that, so whatever you would like to do. We'll come back to this line of code in a little bit, but now down here we're going to say character.humanoid.died connect function with parentheses right here, and then we're going to say lives.value will equal to lives.value minus 1, or actually we can just say minus equals 1, just like this. That'd be a little bit faster. We also want to say player.playerGUI.objective.GUI.enabled will be equal to false, just so we can turn off their objective GUI whenever the player dies. So let's go ahead and press play. Let's open up our player service, Rusty Silly Band, and our lives value. You'll notice it's at 1, and when we go ahead and die to this guy, you'll notice our lives are at 0, and our objective GUI has gone away, which is perfect. And now I think about it, let's actually go into our objective GUI, and we can turn on reset on spawn, so that way once the player dies, it will turn off, but then once the player respawns, it will actually turn back on again. So let's go ahead and test that out. Actually, we die, it's now invisible, and then once we respawn, that is all we need to do here for now. Let's go over to replicated storage, open up our remotes folder, and let's click on the plus icon, and we're going to search for a remote event. This remote event we're going to rename to death message, just like this. And inside of our script, underneath our character pivot to right here, we're going to say game.replicatestorage.remotes.deathMessage. We're going to fire to the client, and then the client that we're going to be firing to is the player. Now, this is everything we need to do for our player added script. So we can actually close this off right now, and let's go back over here. Now, inside of our horror monster right here, let's open them up and open up the pathfinding script. I'm going to scroll all the way down right here, all the way down to where we go ahead and try to, right here, right in the attack function, right when we kill the player. Right before we kill the player, we're just going to, actually we can do it right afterwards, I should say. And we're going to say game.players, unless we have the player service already. Yep, players, get player from character. This is going to be our character that we have from up here. And then we're going to say death.value will be equal to quotation marks horror monster, and you can rename this to whatever your horror monster is named, whether that be like creepy crawly or I don't know, ceiling monster, whatever. You can just name this to whatever you'd like. And if you have multiple monsters in your game, you're gonna have to do this for all of those, that if they kill the player, you just set their death value to this. Now that's all we need to do for the pathfinding script. That's just gonna simply set the death value of the player to whatever killed the player. So let's go ahead, open up our player service, Rusty Silly Band, and then go over to our death value. And you'll notice that if we die to this horror monster, you'll see it'll say horror monster now as the value, which is perfect because we can get scripting inside of our client now. So we have the death message remote, we have the horror monster setting the death value, and then we have the death and life value created inside of server script service. So let's go over to our death GUI right here. Let's click on the plus icon and we're going to insert a local script. This local script, it doesn't matter what we name it. You can name it manager, handler, client, whatever you'd like to call it. I'm just going to leave it as the local script for the sake of the tutorial. However, you can name it something different if you would like to. But as for me, let's start off here at the top of our script. For this, we're going to start off getting the player's service, which is going to be equal to game get service players, just like this. And then we're also going to get our tween service, which is going to be equal to game get service tween service. Now, if you don't know what tween service is, it's simply a way to animate parts and other instances that aren't properly rigged as you would a normal animation. From there, we're also going to create another comment for our other variables aside from our services, and we're going to say local player will be equal to players.localPlayer. Now, whenever you say players.localPlayer, it's simply going to be the player that this local script is found inside of. So as we were talking about the starter GUI thing, moving all the GUIs inside of the player, it's the same thing here. So whenever the player joins the game, it's going to move our death GUI into the player, and this local script is now going to be running for that player. Now we have the player, we can say local death GUI, which is going to be equal to player.playerGUI.deathGUI. And now here's the fun part. So here's where we're going to go ahead and create the death messages. So we're going to say local death messages will be equal to a pair of brackets, squirrely brackets, or braces you can call them. They have a lot of names. Now, here's where we're going to create the different death messages for your different monsters. For me, I have a horror monster. So I'm going to start off by saying horror monster is going to be equal to another pair of squiggly brackets. I can put quotation marks here, and this is going to be the first line that you want. For me, I'm going to do you died, comma, the horror monster is tricky, comma, and then let's see, try running away next time. Something silly like this, or you can do something actually helpful, sort of like what Doors did. You can keep it kind of funny and entertaining, whatever you'd like to do. And then let's also have one, we can put a comma after this last bracket, and this is going to be an unintentional death. So unintentional will be equal to this, and this is going to be for like when the player resets or they die somehow. And I'm just going to set the messages. How'd you die? I don't even know how to help. I don't know, something silly like this. It doesn't really matter what you do. All it matters is that you have an unintentional way to die like this, such as when the player resets, and then at least one for a horror monster inside of your game. However, you can make however many you would like to. And that's all we need to do for the death messages. So let's go down here. Let's create another comment for our functions right here. Oops, not zeros. Let's put some hyphens or dashes right here. I'm going to scroll down a little bit for you guys. Now, we're going to say game.replicatedStorage.remotes.deathMessage.onClient event, which is that event that was firing over to the client from the server that we made inside of our player added script. And we're going to say onClient event connect function, just like this. Now we aren't passing any parameters over to the client, so we don't actually need to specify any parameters inside of here, which is pretty nice. And then we're just going to check if player.lives.value is less than or equal to 0, then we're going to say death GUI.enable will be equal to true, because we want to enable our death GUI. We're also going to say player.playerGUI.objectiveGUI.enabled will be equal to false, so that way we don't see it while we're inside of the death GUI. And then down here we're going to say if player.death.value will be equal to horror monster, not horror monster, just like this. Then what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to say for underscore comma message in I pairs, not pairs, I pairs, because it's going to be for an array that we have, just like this. This is what we call an array in I pairs, and this will be death messages dot horror monster, which is going to be our horror monster death messages right here. Otherwise, we're also going to be doing something for the intentional one, and we're going to do this. We're going to say death GUI dot frame dot. Oh, I forgot we named the text label. So inside our frame, we're going to do death message dot text will be equal to message, and then we're going to say tween service create. This will be our death GUI dot frame dot death message as the instance that we're going to be tweening, and then let's put some tween info inside of here, which for me is going to be about 0.2, and then we need to put a pair of braces right here as the property table we want to tween, and this is going to be the text transparency. And this we're going to set to 0 before we go ahead and tween it, and we're going to say play. So what this is going to do is going to take our death message text label as the instance that we would like to tween. It's going to take a tween info of 0.2 seconds, which means it's going to take 0.2 seconds to complete this tween. And then it's going to take the text transparency as the property that we're looking to tween, and it's going to tween it down to 0, which is completely visible. It's going to tell that to go ahead and play, and then we can continue on with our script. So we're going to wait about 4 seconds right here for the player to actually read the message. I'm going to say tween service create one more time. That's going to be the same death GUI dot frame dot death message as the instance, the same tween info dot new 0.2, and then the same property table with the same text transparency, which will be equal to 1 this time instead of 0, and we're going to say play. After that, we're simply going to say wait 0.2, and this is everything that we need to go ahead and do. Now, at the end of our for loop, let's just put a space right here. We're going to say else if player, that is not player in any way, shape, or form. So else if player dot death dot value equals to, well, actually we can leave this blank because we're just going to have it blank if it was an unintentional death. Then what we're going to go ahead and do is say for underscore comma message. Actually, we can probably just copy and paste this whole thing right up here. And instead of doing death messages dot horror monster, we're going to say death messages dot unintentional. Now you can just copy and paste this for all of your other messages that you have. Now let's go down here to the bottom of our for loop right here in our if statement. And we're just going to drop down a few lines. I'm going to click on this arrow right up here to go ahead and close that off so we don't have to worry about it. And we're going to say death GUI dot frame dot, I forgot how we named the text button, it's play again. So we're going to say dot play again dot visible will be equal to true. And yeah, from there we can actually say death GUI dot frame dot play again. And we can actually put this outside of this event function. So we say death GUI dot frame dot play again dot activated. We're going to connect a function to this. And we're going to say game get service teleport, and this will be the player they want to teleport. Well, actually we need to do the place ID first. So let's go up to the view tab, click on the asset manager right here, click on places, and the horror game tutorial. This is my place that I'm in currently. However, you might have another place that's named differently. So you can just copy this and press copy ID to clipboard, and you simply put this inside of here as the place ID, and then you can put the player as the instance that you would like to teleport to. So whenever the player presses play again, it's going to teleport them back inside of the game, so that way they can go ahead and play again. So anyways, I believe that this is actually all that we have to go ahead and do. So let's click on play right here, and let's test it out. So inside of our players right here, Rusty Silly Band, and then our death value, you'll see it is currently set to nothing. So if we go ahead and reset our character after our jump scare, of course, it is going to say, how'd you die? Let's see. I don't even know how to help. You see, it's going to play our unintentional death message right here, and it's going to say play again, which if we try and click, it's not going to allow us to teleport because you're not actually allowed to teleport inside of Roblox Studio. But if we were to actually go ahead and play the game, you would see that that would work. Let's go ahead and press play instead this time, and let's die to the horror monster. Let's go ahead and die to the horror monster. You'll see that it should have set my death value to horror monster. Yep, you died. Let's see. The horror monster is tricky. And then after a little bit more, try running away next time. something like this, and then once it fades out, it's going to say play again. Anyways, guys, if this death GUI helped you out, please make sure you like, subscribe, and comment down below. It helps the channel out a ton and is completely free. Other than that, though, I hope you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye.